First of all, thank you all for joining us today for an exciting and hopefully informational webinar. News of Google's cookie deprecation rollout has generated a lot of buzz, and we hope today's webinar will kind of provide some info on the who, what, when, where, and why, as well as some strategies to think about for coping with this kind of big change living in a post-cookie world. So just kind of overview of the sort of topics we'll be talking about today. Of course, what will this deprecation look like? How this is going to impact organizations, how you can prepare for the impact, and how to balance privacy and marketing success going forward. And then some time at the end for a Q&A. So let's dive right in. Just a brief kind of overview of what is the state of play as of right now. So as we all know, Google announced its planned goal for 2024 to phase out third-party cookies in the Chrome browser. In January, they rolled this out for a 1%, random 1% of the user base, which is approximately 30 million users, with the goal to have finished rolling this out for everyone by the end of the second half of this year. One key note is this is only going to impact third-party cookies, so those which are dropped by someone other than a website operator, usually for behavioral or digital advertising purposes, and it will not impact first-party cookies, like the ones a website may drop for analytics purposes or remembering preferences like language, things like that. So some of Google's own proposed replacements include its APIs. There's the Topics API, which allows a limited amount of interest-based, browser history-based advertising access by third parties, and the Protected Audience API, which allows in-browser, in-ad auctions based on hashed analytics data. Google also has its own additional tools like enhanced conversion, which allow bidding optimization, as well as, of course, its own Google Ads platform. With that being said, for Matt and Juan, what do orgs need to know to prepare for this rollout? And how is this deprecation going to be impacted by laws and regulations around cookies?
Well, I think the major item here in terms of saying, about the big news, I think this is something that's been going on for the last 3 years now. In terms of saying, hey, it's not just the Google browser, but you have Safari and other browsers that are basically restricting the type of information that you can capture. And third-party cookies is one of those, right? Even the first-party cookies for Safari is kind of something that you don't get there for a long time. I think they are captured for 7 days or so. But I think the major point on this one is what is the shift that we have to adopt in terms of the type of information that we can capture and rely more on first-party data. I think that's one of the big items. And in terms of regulations and so on, which I think is the biggest of the issues that we have, is that all these ideas in terms of what we capture is if we have the rights to do that, or the acknowledgement or the consent from the user to say, yes, you can track me. The problem right now is that the more countries go into opt-in, the less data we will have. So you will have a switch in terms of how much data you'll be able to collect. So that, I think, is the major item here in terms of the ability for us to collect any data from the people that are browsing our websites. So.
Yeah, and I would just add, especially while the focus shifts to acquiring consent from users, I expect that regulations will begin to shift to that as well, how consent is collected, what's allowed, also transparency requirements in terms of how organizations are communicating to site visitors about what's being collected, how it's being leveraged, things like that. I think we can expect regulations like those to become more defined going forward as organizations begin to adopt a first-party focus.
And Juan, so you brought up sort of this interesting question of, we're maybe turning towards first-party data versus third-party data and kind of the impact that may have on consent. So, I mean, how are you thinking about like operationalizing any of these kind of changes to like the consent, opt-in, opt-out, like choice sort of mechanisms that may kind of evolve with this?
Right. So there are two layers into this, right? I think the first one is in terms of people being tracked, and the other one is whether or not you'll be able to message people about any programs that you may have for marketing or any type of promotions, if you will. So the first thing is you do have to have more better standards in terms of what is that you need and what are the customer journey within your website. What are the type of milestones they want to capture that will drive some of the messaging and capabilities that you want to put in or to have in marketing. I think that will become more and more important to define those information architecture, if you will, and also trying to see what is that you'll be able to enable through them, like audience building is going to be very, very important with the first party data. And the second thing is how is that you can rely on other type of sources to say, hey, this is the people that I want to message to or that I want to target. What is out there for us to really drive a message. Well, I think that's the one thing that is very important, right? That piece of the information architecture. Anything else in terms of the technologies? I think technologies will get there. I mean, I think Google is coming out with the groupings or the cohorts type of technology to see what we can do with that. But we're just experimenting right now with trying different things to see actually what works, because this thing is changing every day, right? We're trying to adopt this. Right?
Wonderful. And Matt, maybe since you brought up kind of the role of privacy notices and updates to those, transparency sort of in this context, could you speak a little more to that? I mean, what are kind of the, I guess, main pieces or maybe disclosures that you would anticipate kind of becoming more in the spotlight in reaction to this?
Well, I think there's this notion of being a good faith partner with your site visitors. And so you want to be a good and responsible data steward. You're beginning with an agreement with your site visitor that if by visiting the site and consuming the information there, we as the site managers are going to collect this data in a responsible way. So I think in terms of transparency, that should be something that is communicated clearly to the user. I don't think what I would like to see happen, because what I observe right now is that when you land on a website and you are served a cookie banner, the way in which that banner cohesively integrates into the UX of the site is, it varies by site to site. What I'd like to see is the experience of the banner to actually be more closely integrated with the overall user experience on your site, rather than it kind of appearing like a wart or something there to perform a utility. I think there are ways that you can make it fun, perhaps, and be a little bit more conversational about, rather than having these disclaimers and legalese just render within the banner itself and expect your users to read it. Make it part of the experience, make it conversational. Hey, are you just browsing, or are you considering shopping or signing up for something? If it's the latter, maybe consider opting into cookies or not cookies, but into tracking, so that we can make the site experience better for you. So that you're starting the conversation as a partnership. And I think that's going to telegraph to your potential customers the care you're offering for how you're going to continue to manage and utilize the data well into the customer relationship as well. I think in addition to that, the focus should also begin to, since we are shifting focus to first party data, that means that we're going to have to incentivize in some manner a user offering their consent. Now, that's going to be transactional in some shape or form, not necessarily monetarily, but it can be, for example, through a piece of content, a high value piece of content on your website. A user lands on the website seeking information. You provide a white paper, and the value of that content piece invites the user to fill out a gated form or something to that effect. And then to Juan's point, while you are collecting that first party data, the volunteered data from that user by filling out that data form. You want to be sure that you're collecting just the data you need, especially just the data you need. I think up until recently, we've all been operating in kind of in a mode where more data is better. And I think as things progress going forward and we become more privacy focused, we need to be more deliberate about what data we're collecting and how we're activating it. And I think that's going to include opt-in signals, not only for web browsing and collecting data during the web session, but also enabling an opt-in to activating on that first party data through the pipeline and through the marketing pipeline.
I think this is a very tricky thing, when it comes to say, how do you collect consent, right? When you have an environment like ours, where you have hundreds of sites and domains, and you have hundreds of applications out there, and over 20 million pages that you have to deal with, it's very difficult to say, hey, what is the best way for us to consent, to request consent? But not only that, like you have things like where you gate assets that people that cannot download. Yes, they give you the information, but also they say, I don't want you to contact me, right? So it's becoming very, very difficult to collect all that information in this diverse environment in which we are, and more so when you have multiple types of sites, applications that are SaaS applications, or applications that are served through like cloud and things like that. It's becoming very difficult to collect this data, and more so like when you are in a website, and we've seen these type of behaviors when you have the banner showing up. But you allow people to browse because you want them there. You want them to consume the content, and they get through the point of saying, yes, I want to do a trial of these, right? So they go through all that process. They give you the information, but they never allow you to do the tracking. You keep that thing there, and you expect them to interact with it, but they don't do that. So it's kind of a very difficult scenario that we have to do something more creative to say, hey, create some process that allow us to put in front of them more consciously, that they can actually say, yes, I consent you to do some sort of tracking, right? Because then you have the different levels of tracking. As I say, I can do analytics tracking, but not personalize any data or use that data to give me some targeting messages. So it's going to be interesting how things develop moving forward when it comes to how can you get more information from the people, and that it works well for them to come to trusting you that you're not going to use the data for some other purposes. Right?
Absolutely. And I think this will also be relevant for our kind of next topic here as well, as we kind of turn towards thinking about, okay, what can we do with those creative solutions to kind of react to this? Returning to impact, and all of these kind of questions are certainly very related, but perhaps you guys could speak to, sort of how is this phase out maybe going to interact with your particular orgs, ways of using these third-party cookies in the past, and sort of maybe going forward, as well as what may need to change about those approaches. And again, continuing the previous conversation.
Well, let me start on this one. I think the main point on third-party cookies, again, I think it is about knowing anything that you can of first-time visitors, right? And that's I think is where you get the most value of them, and then how then you'll be able to get people out there to come over and to create the demand for the site. And since some of this is we cannot do as much as we were able to do before, so the focus is for those that are here, how do we keep them interested in what we have, that they actually go through a process to convert, right? So content strategy becomes very important for this, in saying, hey, we have the right content that will keep you in the site now that you're here. So let me show you what we can do for you, right? So that becomes very important. And then in terms of phasing this out, as I mentioned before, this is going on for a while. And so there are other strategies like alternate IDs that we're using, like ID5, for instance, right? To see, we have a network of ad servers that would use this unique identifier across the board. So can we use their services to allow us to do the reaching out, right? That allows us to do the targeting. I think that's one of the main aspect of these, that you rely on these other type of trends and solutions that deals with this uniqueness, or how to identify unique people out there that you can target. I think that's in terms of the impact and what is the things that you can do, right?
Yeah, to Juan's point, there isn't going to be any one solution going forward. We're going to have to be open to whatever solution tends to surface. Like Juan said, universal IDs or alternative IDs, privacy sandbox solutions as those become more viable. But also, to Juan's point about keeping traffic on the website, yes, content strategies need to be robust. I think if it's not already the case, your SEO team needs to have a loud and active voice at the table when it comes to managing the website, the content and SEO go hand in hand. Yeah.
And in your minds, we've talked about first-party data streams and these alternatives. Are there particular like first-party data channels or ways of collecting that data that seem the most, I mean, maybe useful even? You know, I've seen a lot of chatter around, okay, well, maybe newsletter data or comment section data, or some of those, maybe quizzes, promotions, things of that nature. And I always wonder too, like, how applicable are those to businesses across different industries? Because it seems like that's very industry specific as to how applicable or how useful that might be. If you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think we can start by acknowledging what appears to be a growing distinction between what is considered first-party data and what is being considered as zero-party data. And I'm not sure I'm thrilled about this distinction because I kind of view it all as first-party data. But the distinction is that first-party data is what you observe on your website and you are collecting in your analytics tools when you're able, when you have achieved consent. And then your zero-party data is the data that your users or your site visitors are volunteering, either through web captures or surveys, form captures or surveys, and other methods where users are signing up and volunteering their information. I'm inclined to say that volunteered information is going to be the more valuable of between the two. And so, but the first-party data generally is going to become the most valuable aspect. And in terms of how that's acquired, I'm sorry, Juan, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm interested to see what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a case. Everyone's going to be a little bit different depending on what kind of business they're in, the industry, and things of that nature. Whether a newsletter is perceived as more valuable to a potential user base based on how they consume information versus something else. I think, for example, if permit me to get a little bit anecdotal, I enjoy playing video games. Many people do. Recently, there's this game coming out on consoles called Dragon's Dogma 2. I'm excited about it. What was interesting to me about what they did to promote this game prior to its release, I think next week, is that they released the character creator for free so that they enabled the potential buyers to interact with the game, build their characters in the game, and then those characters would, of course, progress into the actual gameplay when the game releases. But what you have are, probably a large population of users of that character creator who are very likely to purchase. But then you probably also have a subset who are maybe thinking about it, considering it, kicking the tires, or if nothing else, just enjoying the character creator itself and then posting about it. So I think there are a number of ways to entice users to volunteer their information. And I think it's just about finding what is in line with how your consumers perceive your brand, how they interact with your websites.
Yeah, I think there are different strategies for all of these, right? In terms of user declared data or the zero-party data, and also the first-party data whenever you're able to get it. So you want to have a clear understanding of people reactions. If you have they subscribe to newsletters, right? If they go through the site and they provide their sentiment about how they feel, whether or not they're finding what they're looking for, whether or not they feel that they're getting the right information according to their needs, or whether you can really identify or anticipate their needs based on what they're doing within the site. I think those are things that or strategies that you can implement if you have the luxury of being able to track them and be able to capture that first party data. So I think the feedback mechanism is very, very important. When you get and when you provide them and give them newsletters that they allow you to say, I subscribe to a newsletter, you send that to them. What are the mechanisms that you have to see that reaction to the information that you send into them? And then if you have the ability to identify what people are really converting or what people are really making it to the end, so you can trace things back and say, hey, this is what's working, right? In terms of the type of information that we're gathering when it comes to intent data that based on their browsing, based on what they're consuming and all of that, say that information is what's working. So moving forward, we have to focus in providing the type of content that aligns with that type of mechanisms, because it just reflects what people are interested. And the other piece of this is that we have to be mindful that these type of behaviors or this type of understanding, they come across multiple sessions and over time. And it's very tricky to really identify what is the right amount of time that you can use to define the life cycle of a buy, for instance, right? To say, hey, this is what it takes people to go through all of that. So this is the type of information and the amount of information that I have to process in order to understand what works and what doesn't work. So you have to be very, very precise, and you have to be and have, as I said before, a very good content strategy and something that allows you to understand what people were doing on the site and how they were interested on your assets or content, and how that actually had an impact in terms of how they convert. Which at the end, that's really what we want them to do, right? On the first party, on the zero party data, I think the main point of that and the type of information that we have is we can use that data to do cross-sell and upsell of individuals and see what are the type of things that they may be interested on and create strategies to do that. So a data flow or a content supply, if you will, of information, not only in terms of what you have to offer to them, but also the data that you're collecting, that you have a very good process that allows you to look into that data throughout the life cycle of the journey. So it's not the marketing side, it's part of the sales part, the sales structure, and also support structure if you have any of that. So you have to start thinking in this holistic way to make the most of the little that you can get nowadays.
Absolutely. And to maybe wrap this into kind of some of the results from our first poll here, it looks like, there's two sorts of topics that are the largest concern, at least to our audience, based on this poll. One is very understandable, being compliant with all privacy laws applicable. And the second, which I think ties into that, privacy concerns negatively impacting analytics efforts. So kind of starting on that first piece, I mean, even pre this, obviously operationalizing any kind of choice tools, GPCs, CMPs, CCMs, is incredibly difficult when it comes to, there is a whole tapestry of different rules, regulations around, okay, it depends on where this user happens to be coming from, where they're located, like geolocating, and certainly geo-targeting or geo-locking of all of those forms and things like that is very complicated to see, okay, this is firing for so-and-so, this is firing for so-and-so. When it comes to, I guess, remaining in compliance with this whole tapestry of things, and from a tech perspective, do you guys have any thoughts in terms of, okay, how can we configure some of these tools, like our consent recording tools or CCM tools, whatever the features of those, or even things like GPCs? What are your thoughts kind of on the role of those different pieces in kind of helping to ensure compliance, recording consents, getting consents, all of that kind of stuff?
For us, I think that, as I said before, there are two layers of these, right? And therefore regulatory compliance. And one of them is, and so people wouldn't make mistakes in terms of saying, are you allowed to track people? And what is that you use the information for? What is the purpose of that information that you're collecting? And the second one is user declared data or the zero party data, to say what is it you can do with that, and whether or not you have messaging all of to the user. And the point of the one that has the most significance is the user declared data. When they say, hey, this is my data, this is what allowed you to, based on what you told me, I allowed you or not to use that information for marketing purposes or other type of purposes. For that, you do have to have information that they provided their consent or that they suppress their consent, right? In terms of messaging. And that is something that you have to use in order to do any type of the machinery that you have on marketing or any type of interaction with the user. You have to be very, very mindful about that. When it comes to first party data and anything that is about tracking, I think it is sufficient to say that there is the aspect of saying, hey, we have technology like Trustarks and say, hey, we're collecting the consent. But the interesting thing about that is that you can only have that in the cookie on the browser, and there is not much that you can do to say, oh, this is what you provided to us, unless they give you analytics or personalization level of consent, and then you can say, oh, you allow us to do this, and we can store that. But I think the major point of it is that the only place that you actually need to get information about consent is when there is user declared data, when there is a zero party data. And we do have the mechanisms to do that and to capture that information. And the most important thing about that is then how are you going to be able to use that on the whole myriad of type of messaging that you do as a company, to go and say, hey, from the market perspective, from the sales perspective, or any other type of channels that you have, how are you going to be able to maintain that consent, and at which level you were given the consent, right? And what channel they allow you to provide the consent on. So that becomes a very complex process to define how are you going to be able to honor the consent that you were giving at which level for which application and in which country this applies to. So that I think is very important in terms of how the approach in technologies is a hybrid type of solution for us, right? In terms of saying, hey, we use the third parties or vendors to provide us with some infrastructure, and for some other ones we use our own technology to keep track of these and be able to use it when needed.
And it'll be interesting to see too, and you mentioned some like homebrew tools. There's obviously a lot of third-party tools out there for things like managing, tracking, getting consent, CCM, CMP, all of that good stuff. Really interesting too to think, the impact on those tools as well. They are also going to have to evolve. I've seen some buzz about how these are evolving. It's very interesting, and I think honestly we're all kind of in the same boat of Not quite sure how that's going to look like or what's going to be the most effective, but the technology is also going to have to change, adapt, to this kind of new set of purposes.
Yeah, and the rules are changing so fast. I mean, I remember the time when China became, the people's regulation came alive, and there were two layers of consent: the consent of saying not tracking, and the other one is saying you don't transfer the information out of the country, right? And how you have to compromise. How is that you may be able to define how you interpret the law, and how then you work with the government, or when you go with the agencies to make sure that you're doing the right thing, and that the vendor that you're working with actually provides you the platform to enable this type of needs or this type of solutions, right?
Yeah, just to add to that, and I think the answer depends on the size of the organization and what capabilities are built into the workforce too. And so I think there's probably utility to be gained by, when possible, relying on third-party technologies that have built privacy into the structure of their services, so that when the market changes, when regulations change, you're not scrambling internally with limited resources to respond to these changes. You will be, but that will depend on how much of that you are managing internally versus how much is being managed by a third-party service like a TrustArc, for example. And I think this all speaks to this notion of privacy by design. And so going forward, as you are shopping and onboarding tools and services, what needs to be part of that conversation is, how does this tool help us to manage the privacy state of a given user or a given customer, and how are they able to nimbly respond to updates and regulations, changes in markets, new technologies, and things to that effect as well. It's great if you work for a large organization or an organization that has a lot of expertise in the space. You have data engineers, you have data scientists that are able to manage your database, your data sets, to better support this opt-in flag for a user base. But in a smaller scale sense, if you don't have those services internally, then I think there's merit to seeking partnerships, whether in ways you can possibly outsource that to technology, to services, to other entities as well.
Yeah, I think you touch on a very good point, Matt. And this is the privacy by design, and the impact that it has in a company that creates software or services that capture information, right? And one of the things that we have not talked about is the amount of investment that you have to put in place, both in resources and money, really, to be able to transform the whole set of offerings that you have, to go through these privacy by design or security by design type of approaches and paradigms. And it's not as easy, right, to first to secure the funding to do this, the resources, and the time that it'll take for you to transform the whole infrastructure into this, and the pressure that you get that you may not be able to do it in time because of regulations that are coming up. So those are things that are very difficult to address, and you have to do compromises. You have to focus on saying, hey, what's important to the company, and what will happen if something happens. I mean, there is a litigation about this or not, and what's at stake. Because brand is very important, and how you perceive in the world in terms of the name of the company being involved in this type of litigations, right? And you want to avoid that because you'll hurt the bottom line. So I think it's just that aspect of design of design first type of paradigms is hurting and challenging organizations to do something about it and invest on this type of approaches and strategies, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
challenging for sure. And I think this kind of speaks to what I was suggesting earlier, which is understanding how you are communicating and telegraphing to your potential customer base, your users, in terms of what your privacy stature is or might be. In some cases, there are companies that are likely expected to have a stronger or perhaps stricter privacy stature. So they might be a little bit ahead of the regulations, a little bit more reserved about certain tactics versus other companies that where it may not be necessary to be that ahead of the curve or on the bleeding edge of it. Of course, you have to be compliant, but there are certainly cases in which some companies might want to be the example of what privacy by design might look like in an ideal or in an extreme sense as well. And I think TrustArc could be one of those. Password managers might be one of those things where security and privacy are top of mind for their user base.
Absolutely. And I'd like to continue touching on this privacy by design topic as well. So maybe circling back, because I think, again, this is very relevant, circling back onto this topic of privacy by design, by its very definition, that obviously involves a lot of cross-functional buy-in within an organization. What are some of the steps that you guys could envision needing to take in order to get that cross-functional collaboration going? Because I mean, with privacy by design, looking from step one, I mean, we're thinking who's involved? Engineers, obviously lawyers will be involved, as they always are. Privacy folks, people on the tech side, ITIS, a lot of people involved. How do we get that kind of for some folks, they may not be terribly, I mean, this digital advertising ecosystem, for example, is very complex. The cookie stuff, very complex. Even things like these APIs, privacy sandbox, very technical, kind of granular things. So we may be dealing with people who are very, very, have a lot of expertise and knowledge in that area, people who are not as familiar, people who are kind of focused on job functions that maybe are not super zeroed in on privacy. And certainly our engineering and tech teams, maybe they're there, maybe not quite, maybe not everyone in the chain. So how can we kind of bring together all of these departments, cross functions, things like that, in order to really be putting this privacy by design and putting these sorts of things into place to kind of not future proof, but to be anticipating things like this?
I think this is a cultural change, if you will, right? So you have to have, as an enterprise, the programs to ensure that everyone in the company understands the value of the privacy laws and the compliance and regulatory compliance and all of that. Because, that happens not only on the programs, it happens in the conversations that you're having, the type of information that you're capturing, and how you relate to your customers and things like that. So this is part of the conversation that you need to have at the company level for everyone. Then the second point is make sure that you have the right documentation and the right communication channels to ensure that for different areas, whether you're designing applications, whether you're designing websites, whether you are doing marketing programs, whether you're in sales, to make sure that they do understand the type of compliance that they have to go through, right? To understand the requirements that exist, not necessarily telling them how exactly things have to be done, because they're very intelligent people, right? What you want to make sure is that you give them what is that we're looking for in terms of the things that we need to be in compliance with, what tools and methodologies you provide to them to attain that purpose, attain that goal. And then, and this is interesting in terms of what is it you do for regulatory compliance, right? What methods, infrastructures, and programs and solutions you have in place to ensure that you have a way to confirm that we're really in compliance, right? And that goes in terms of a whole program to define and say, what if you're not? I mean, because even with all the information that you provided, even with everything that you have, there may be spaces where it's not possible to attain compliance right from the get-go. And you have to go in there and say, what is that process that I have to make them compliant, right? And what you do in the meantime, those type of programs and strategies have to be in place in order for us to say, not only do we have everything that is needed to provide the information on how to do this, but also what is it we have in place to ensure and to have ways and tools that allow us to confirm that in fact we are in compliance and that we'll never deviate from that, because you have a snapshot and say, oh, we are in compliance today. About tomorrow, I don't know, right? That's part of the process that I think people will need to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the challenges we face is that culture is hard. Changing culture in an organization, and particularly large organizations, can be challenging, depending on who you are and how you're trying to change it. And when it comes to privacy regulations and security and things to that effect, I think you're on your heels if you're approaching it from a perspective where we have to be compliant and we have to do this in order to fill in the blank. Of course, that's a given, but how do you begin to influence a culture change, particularly with marketers who perhaps perceive this as a frustrating eventuality or an expensive one, is to start focusing on also the value propositions that come along with shifting towards a more proactive privacy by design approach to your organizational decision making.
Absolutely. And as with so many things in privacy, I feel like sometimes it is kind of overcoming the challenge of sometimes these different job functions get very siloed. Sometimes, okay, marketing is in its own world, privacy is maybe in its own world, maybe tech engineering are in their own world. So it really is kind of that ongoing challenge of getting everyone on the same page and really breaking it down very granularly to Juan's point. This is exactly, what is happening. This is what needs to happen. These are, the kind of pieces that apply to engineering functions or privacy functions or legal functions, because this really does sort of involve kind of top-down buy-in involvement, creative problem solving from kind of all of those different functions, which can be definitely a difficult task. So we have a question in the chat, maybe to touch on just while we have some of our experts here. So someone has asked, do you have any resources or recommendations for building out server-side tagging to begin using first-party tags instead of third-party tags for ad and analytics? If you guys have any thoughts on that one.
Well, I think by the way, server tagging, I think, is something that that we have to look at more and more nowadays, because I think that's the only way they can ensure that you're giving only the information that they need or that we need to capture, whether it is for first-party data or for any of the third parties that you need to use, right? And this because you always use vendors tags that you need to send data to, and server-side communication, I think, is the best. I think that's the direction that we should go, unless it's strictly necessary to have the tag running on the client. Because if something changes and they change something, they may be able to bring in a piggybacking tag, or they may be capturing things without them noticing that they've made that change. And that is something that you can prevent by moving them to the backend and to server type of communication. I don't think that in terms of what we do for the tagging for ad advertisement, all of that. Ad advertisement, a lot of them, they need to have the front end, or they need to have the ID. So as long as you provide that universal ID, then I think they can deal with how they connect and the dots in the back end and how they get the data and be able to give you some value. But then, other than that, depending on the actual needs of the vendor that you're dealing with, some of them do not have server to server, so they have to deal with things on the client. But if they have server to server, that would be the way to go. I think that's the way that we should do things, to be honest.
Yeah, I think as the technology continues to mature, you might see a world where the client-side tag manager is no longer necessary. I would argue that, I think a client-side tag manager is always going to be needed as a component of server-side tag management for the reasons Juan just mentioned, which is primarily that some vendors don't have server-to-server tracking solutions set up yet. Some vendors need to run in the client. But I think even beyond that, the client-side tag manager still offers the benefit of being less dependable on your web developers when it comes to implementing data collection with a server-side tag manager. You, of course, would continue to rely on your web developers for maintaining and building a robust data layer in the client, from which then you can use the client-side tag manager to dispatch data to your server side. But the client-side tag manager still enables a technical marketer perhaps to make changes or collect data from the client side and then send it to the server side proxy. And then I think when we begin talking about first-party data and how a server-side tag manager begins to fit into that, I think there are a number of benefits that you gain by introducing a server-side tagging solution. One is first-party data ownership. And so so observable first-party data ownership. While you are using the server-side tag manager to dispatch that data to third parties like Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, your ad vendors and such, you can also dispatch it to your own cloud space, your own databases, your data warehouse, in order to begin storing and structuring that data in a manner that allows you to activate it and own it, rather than having to rely on a third-party tool like analytics tool to also report out and activate that data. Ideally, you're doing both, but I think as we're shifting to the first-party data focus, data ownership becomes an important component of it as well. And then lastly, what I'll say is, I think when server-side tag managers started being introduced to the market, there was an initial perception that server-side tag managers are the way to circumvent perhaps some of these privacy regulations or workarounds for third-party cookies and things like that. And I just want to emphasize that if you are introducing a server-side tag management solution, it becomes even more important to be transparent about what data you are collecting and how you're using it, especially because once you start dispatching data from your website to this server proxy and then parsing it out to your third-party vendors, what ends up happening is that the site visitor loses the visibility into where those network requests are actually going, because they're all going into the server-side tag manager's proxy server now. And so they're going to see that one endpoint, and then it gets parsed out. So that's why I think transparency is going to be especially important with a tool like that.
Yeah, and that's part of the trust that you build with the customers and visitors. And I cannot emphasize more than what you said, Matt, in terms of the data layer. It's so important to invest the time to define the standard that you have for data collection and the representation of that data in a data layer on the web pages, because then there's a lot of things that should happen when it comes to providing the information to third parties. Sometimes URLs may have PI data. So you may have like email addresses, you may have information in their names, last names, and you want to make sure that you create a data layer that will allow you to then filter out or mask certain information that should not go downstream, right? And whether you do that on the front end or whether you do it server side, it is important to have this data layer and that you have organization organize the information that you have within the browser. So any application, if you use a tag manager, which I think everybody should do that, you have the right mapping of the data and that you are consistent on sending the same information to every single tag or provider that you have, whether it is on the front end or whether it is in the back end. I think that's very important. And I think, Matt, I think is a great thing to do and something that everybody should be able to invest the time and do that so they have consistency in terms of what is being captured and how the data is being used by anybody downstream.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, go ahead, Erik. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just saying that thank you both for your insight. That's a very technical question. And again, this is the importance of those cross-functional teams, since some of this stuff does get quite, in the weeds and technical, but that knowledge and expertise is going to be invaluable moving forward with this. Just as we turn to start wrapping up, if anyone has any additional questions that they'd like us to take a look at, we're kind of winding down, feel free to pop them in the little Q&A section. Kind of turning as we start to wrap up to probably the ultimate question that everybody is asking or thinking about, or really head scratching about. Okay, how will you explore new privacy-friendly approaches for engagement? So our poll results, we have some folks who are not sure yet, which is very fair. This is very uncharted territory. Some folks talking about CCM tools like TrustArcs, things of that nature. And we also had a response, still working on this. Okay, that's absolutely everyone, I think, is definitely feeling that. And learning about how CAPI works. Is that something either of you could speak to? Because I'm not quite familiar with that myself. But definitely something you can look into.
I'm not familiar with not with the name, but I would say.
Gotcha.
Yeah, in a world of acronyms, I don't know if I know that one either.
Exactly. But if anyone has any additional things to pop in that Q&A, please feel free to do so if you want to expound on anything from the polls, and we'll take a look at those in a second. So as our kind of wrap up, how are you guys thinking about exploring these new privacy-friendly approaches? I mean, honestly, even just sort of next steps, this second Q 2024 current deadline by Google that is quickly approaching somehow, so the year is blasting by. And certainly to say that is subject to change. A lot of these sort of goalposts have changed. I know right now UK regulators are looking at some different issues relating to this that have not been resolved yet. So who knows if that's going to be pushed, but obviously starting to prepare now is really the key to success. If there's anything you guys can share about, okay, what to do now in the immediate term with what we know right now, which granted, it's not a ton and definitely kind of evolving at all times, but maybe what's something you can do today to start getting in position, for this pivot?
Yeah, so Google has, as you said, moved the goalpost several times now, but I don't think we want to wait for the possibility that they may move it again. I think the writing's on the wall, and we need to be preparing now, if we're not already, to start shifting our strategies to a cookieless world. And I think, starting at the most focused and I think probably the nature of this discussion, which is third-party cookie deprecation. For one thing, anybody who uses the Chrome browser can see today what third-party cookies are being collected by using Chrome's dev tools. So if you right-click on your screen and then choose Inspect, that's going to pull up a pane on the bottom of your window, on the right side of your window, And there's a bunch of tools that are built into the browser that enables you to start diagnosing and observing the backend functionality of the browser tool. And what Google has introduced are flags within the console or the JavaScript console that points out what third-party cookies are going to be blocked and when they're blocked. So I think the audit starts there to see what is that list and what vendors are associated with those cookies. And then you can start building a plan as to reaching out to those vendors to understand how are they responding to the change in technology. Are they introducing new technology themselves, whether that's other tracking methodologies like alternative IDs, whether there's server-side solutions, if they're introducing modeling or AI into their reporting and attribution, things like that. But I think that starts with the audit. And I think the conversation also starts with that, because that's when you start integrating with other teams, particularly as you start generating that vendor list, because some of those vendors are going to have stakeholders that are outside of marketing. And so that's how you start building your roundtable around the privacy conversation that Juan was speaking to earlier as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that know where you are today. I think that assessment and understanding how you measure against this change in the technology, which, by the way, I mean, as I said, it's been going on for a while now, and things are changing every day. So it's a never-ending job, to be honest. But I think that assessment is very important to know where you are, what type of things that you'll see. Like, Matt was saying, hey, look at the cookies that are out there, and there's a warning that shows up that says, hey, this will go away. So, make sure that you do that, and then define the strategy to say, hey, how do we mitigate this issue, and then move forward with it. I think that's the one thing, and then see what other type of technologies will be there. You were talking about the privacy sandbox, and what would that mean for people, and how would you be able to use that? I mean, I think there'll be there's some warranted type of approaches, so POCs that you can do to get and test these technologies and see how they may be able to help you. And again, and everything else is more of a overall strategy, is to define what is it you need to do to focus on the first party data as much as you can, and thinking that moving forward, most of the type of work that you'll be able to do will be very, very transactional within the session. What is it you can learn about the individual, and what is it you can do to provide them something of value? So we'll have narrowing the area in which we can actually act, right? So it's not going to be a long process to define attribution and all that kind of stuff. Things will start changing in a way that we'll be focusing a lot in terms of that transaction. You came here for something. How can we know what that was, and how we can provide you with the most information to keep you interested, and luckily that you'll convert.
Wonderful. That's very helpful. We are at time, but a big thank you certainly to our speakers. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Juan, for your insights. And thank you also to the audience for your questions, comments, all of that good stuff. So